Kia ora and welcome to the Aotearoa Rugby Pod. Wow, it was an All Blacks team. A few surprises and plenty to get into this week. We're going to have a good look at the bolters like Dallas McLeod, what he does well statistically. Why is he in this team? Some of the guys who missed out, Hoskins Sotutu, not even in the top 60 players in the country now, which is quite amazing, and everybody else as well. So stick with us over the next hour. Plenty to discuss. Of course, there's a Super Rugby final to come as well. Don't have to forget about that. And we've got a man back to help us chat through that. But before we get to him, James Parsons, how are you?
Well, there's a few glaring surprises for me. Obviously, a couple of friends missing the cut, but outside of that, probably Dallas McLeod's the biggest surprise. But the other positions, you knew it was going to be a tight, tough tussle for those sorts of players in and out. Yeah,
plenty to discuss there. And joining us after a beautiful holiday all around Europe and a rugby game in the middle, out of Dubai, Bryn Hall. Thank you for joining us once again. Crusaders beat the Blues. You had to be back, didn't you?
Boys, it's good to be back. No, I thought it'd be a great time just to jump on for my old mate. He's obviously hurting a little bit, but we'll dive into that. To be honest, probably the best half of foot I've ever seen the Crusaders play. I think clinically and ruthlessly, they were on swung in that first half. But yeah, Dallas McLeod, wow, what a bolter! I can't obviously play with him a lot. I think the last bolter you have to go back to maybe is Aotearoa that was announced just that nobody thought was coming. So really stoked for him and his growth, but you look forward to going a little bit deeper with that All Black squad as well.
Let's start with Dallas McLeod, really. And Bryn, I'd love to get you more of your input. Ian Foster likes his speed, he likes his attitude, he likes his kick chase, he likes his versatility. Have you seen all of those things in him? What do you like about this guy?
He's had a massive improvement compared to last year. I think, he was struggling to, have a contract with the Crusaders, even with Mitre 10 Cup as well, being held off to not be able to be selected within that team. But then, you look at 12 months and I guess the work that he's done has been great. And I think, he's a great ball carrier, been a great defender on the wing as well. I think if you look in the semi-finals, decision-making on the wing and being able to make tackles on the edge is going to be really important. And he's did a great job against Caleb Clark, who, you'd have to say arguably is one of the greater ball carriers in the world. So, and he works hard off the ball. So he's done a lot of good things well, but I think the improvements that we've seen in the 12 months, I think if he would have told you at the start of the year that he would have been in the All Black squad, he would have laughed at me.
I think it is a game like he had against the Blues at Eden Park that's probably got him the nod for that midfield spot because he's played a lot on the wing this season. So, he does have that versatility, but obviously Enor as well. McLeod and Enor in the NPC for Canterbury have formed quite a combination. They're really destructive. They're great at bringing their blindside wingers into games. They're good defensively. So, potentially Enor going really well and being in and around that midfield, and then obviously a lot of injuries in and around the midfield. It's created an opportunity which, it might be a bolter, but I suppose that's the beauty is, maybe the expectation won't be as high as normal All Black debutants and he can sort of relieve himself of that pressure and rip into it.
I think back about people who, came in and maybe aren't the flashy guys, aren't the guys with the big reputation, aren't the guys who everyone's saying is going to be an All Black, and then they become very good All Blacks. People like Conrad Smith, that's a big comparison to make, but here's a guy who was a bit of an unfashionable looking player, but was very effective at test level. Could we see a similar kind of approach from a Dallas McLeod?
Potentially, but I do think that midfield partnership is key. You actually do need, it was Ma'a and Conrad, do you know what I mean? So he can't sort of rely on himself as an individual. But I suppose the one thing I'm interested from Bryn's point of view is, there has been a lot of heat on Roger in and around the ability to kick. We know the All Blacks, through Havili and Geordie Barrett, want to use their 12 to kick. Is that part of his game? Have you seen that at training, Bryn?
Yeah, I think he has. He showed glimpses of it, I think, at Mitre 10 Cup level, Bunnings MP, and even a little bit in the Crusaders this year. But I think it definitely is a part of his game that he's able to do it. You probably haven't seen it a lot because I think you look at the Crusaders setup, they with David Havili coming back and Jack Goodyear at the number 12, they've slotted him on the wing. And so that kicking game and 12 that you're talking about, Jip hasn't probably seen a lot in the back end of the Super Rugby comp, but it definitely is within his skill set. He can probably do it off both feet as well with the time that we've had. But again, just probably hasn't had the opportunities with Jack being there at 12 at the moment and with David Havili being out.
As a 12, line running is very important.
He's very good at that. He's between himself and probably Bryce Heem, when they've played in that 12 position, they've made probably the most damage. So in terms of getting off the game, like if we use the game against the Blues at Eden Park, he was probably the difference really in them getting away with that one. When the Blues had a lot of possession, we know they had a lot of 22-metre entries, and the Crusaders once again made a lot of tackles, and that's what makes them a championship winning team. But in terms of the attacking side of the ball, he was massive.
What about his line running makes him good at it?
Oh, when he commits, he commits. Like, he's a big body, he's strong in the, I suppose, collision area, but you do have to credit, like, the one thing the Crusaders do so well and have for a consistent amount of time is whatever your role is, you've got to execute it, and that creates opportunities. And then a guy like Richie Mo'unga is very good at picking the right opportunity, and it will make the individual shine, but there's so many other variables moving into him having the ability. But the one thing I like as a 12, when he goes, he commits to his line, and whether someone's in front of him or not, he's coming normally 9 times out of the 10 out the other side.
Bryn, one of the key things about being a good test player is rugby IQ and composure. Does he have those two things, you think, for test level?
He's played enough rugby to, I guess, have an opportunity to understand what it looks like. I think he came in 2018, and it's been a gradual grind for Dallas, I guess, with David Havili, Jack Goodhue, Braden Ennor, then having to buy his time to be able to get an opportunity to play meaningful rugby at Super Rugby level. But he's been in and around those guys, and what it looks like to be an All Black, and I guess in the Crusaders environment, preparation-wise, to be able to succeed on the field. You look at his games throughout the year, especially this year, the consistency. His bad game to a good game was pretty much you couldn't tell the difference, and so that's the kind of blueprint that you want going into test footy. And I think, look, you'd have to think that Anton Lienert-Brown and Geordie Barrett would be, the 12s that they're probably looking at. And with Dallas coming in with their rugby championship, being able to bring him in the environment, learn. And then if there are injuries based on the performance that he's had at Super Rugby, they must have confidence that he'll be able to do the job at 12.
Let's talk Levi Elmore. We've talked about him a lot this season. As a meter reader, a guy who can score, can bust the line, not even in the picture now, having been in that All Blacks 15 last year.
Yeah, I think he's definitely in the picture, because he wouldn't have probably made that move to the Crusaders had he not had conversations with certain personnel. But yeah, based on that, I suppose this All Black coaching group selected last year's All Blacks 15, and they've done so. They've obviously seen something in his game that we certainly haven't, but it has been a hard year for him. Like, he's still, he's shined, I think, both sides of the ball at times in a team that, has sort of really struggled defensively. So it may be that hasn't helped his case.
But and a lack of those other skills we're talking about, kicking game, etc., it sounds like they're just not after that put your head down and smash it forward kind of bloke.
No, and I suppose that's where Ngani Laumapi, struggled as well. He wanted more game time, he wanted to be the number 12, and he wasn't getting that, so he had to move on, and that was the same coaching group. So I think we do know that they want that 12 to have the ability to be a release valve for the 10 to, take advantage of those attacking kick spaces and all the 50-22s in the Rugby Championship.
I think, often the relief valve in many teams has been that big ball running 12 at the outside. Pop the short ball, Sam Tutupo style, get you over the advantage line, reset and carry on. That's just not really needed anymore?
I think it's needed at times, but I think we've seen at the international game, sort of similar to the way the Crusaders defended on the weekend, like that. It is swarming defence, and they're ruthless in terms of what they do at that breakdown and slowing. So even if you do get a little bit over the gain line as a barnstorming 12, at that international level, you get turned over a lot of the time as well, because you get that separation between cleaners and, so the kick game has become more and more important at that international level. And, I feel like the coaches are probably pretty firm on the way they want to play and how, they want to play at the World Cup up front. I think we've seen that in a number of their selections, and then obviously out the back as well.
The other kind of dumbfounding one, Bryn, was Shaun Stevenson. Obviously the former player of Super Rugby.
Look, it's tough. I think, I think if you're looking on the attacking side of the game, scores tries, has a great kicking game, and has been able to really, influence games with his attacking priorities. But I think, probably the one work on that Fozzie's talked about is his defence. Now, I think it's been an area that he's really, really improved on. You'll probably touch on the stats around what that might look like, but I think it's an improvement in his game that he's really had, and so. it's tough. It'd be a really tough conversation there with Shooter because, the improvements that he's made, they must just see him as a fullback, as not as a winger option, because that's probably the only one area that you can think possibly that he might not get selected. And even then, it's thinking like he might be hard done by, because he's done pretty well in that area. I think it's been a massive improvement in his game, and you probably need it to jip around the stats around what that's needed. But yeah, a real tough one for Shooter. It's good that he is going his injury cover, with obviously Mark Talia being there, been a bit of a kick in the guts, I think. Still being able to head over there, not based on your selection merits, but yeah, I think it's a tough one for Shooter, but he'll go back to the drawing board, and hopefully his defensive game can get a little bit better that Fozzie's touched on.
How he goes into the environment will be critical though. He's got, that's quite, you don't make the squad, but then you've got an opportunity to impress the coaches. And, so many players have made, I suppose, their test match careers in those weeks before they actually get a game is what they do, and I suppose their attitude to it. So, like Shaun's just got better and better every year he's had, and he's got a great opportunity to go in there and change it. And I don't think they're big shifts. They obviously are in their head around international rugby, but I don't think we saw too many frailties in that game that he played for the Māoris, and then obviously the All Blacks 15 on the India tour, and and if you look at him from NPC, like he was really physical in his collisions out the back and the work he was doing in the backfield to make those tackles. I think it's been the same this season. And a lot of the time he's on the edge because, Damien does drop back into that backfield. But I went through and looked at the stats, and he's tackling at 80% for the season, but he's played more minutes than most that I could compare him against. So you got Tom Wright, who was the closest in terms of minutes. He was 71%, and Tom Wright's had a pretty good year. And you wouldn't say he's a passive defender. Will Jordan's a point of difference. He has only played just over 300 minutes though, so less opportunity to miss tackles or make them. He's tackling at 89%, so that is quite strong. Especially for the position he is in that backfield, it is quite hard to make those tackles. Zahn Sullivan's at 79%, Josh Morby's at 74%, and I just thought Max Jorgensen, a lot of talk about him and his season and how he played, he's at 78%. So it's not drastic, is really what I'm trying to point out. Yeah, he'd want to be a little bit higher, but I think some of his defensive work, especially covering the backfield, will be key. Maybe they've looked at the last few weeks, the Reds got a number of 50-22, so they did manipulate that pendulum quite well. So maybe that was part of it. I'm not too sure, but I do think, stats is one thing. I can read out every stat on every player and why they shouldn't be selected, but I have noted here that the performance of the last 2 weeks, I think, has counted for a hell of a lot. I really do. And I think that's shown in the selection because mainly the guys that have got the nod have performed.
I suppose when you looked at that squad, and we've talked about this at length, the options that they have at fullback, whether it's Will Jordan, whether it's Geordie Barrett, whether it's Bowden Barrett or Damien McKenzie, they are flush with fullback. So if they do not see him as a winger, then, to me, it feels like they're reaching. They're reaching for a reason not to pick him. They just need to say, well, we're well served.
Yeah, we've got 5 fullbacks.
We're all right?
But he's a great winger. Like, when he's played at that All Blacks 15 level or Māori ABs, he's been a winger. Like, he is a proven winger, in my opinion.
And we've seen at international level, if you're Bryn to talk about the physical nature, well, when he's played for New Zealand Māori, at what is really a test level, he hasn't had a problem, has he?
Man, there's no more real, opportunities other than being an All Black to play at the international level to try and prove yourself, because he's done it at Māori level. He did it at the All Black 15 level. But I guess, the selectors have told him this is an area that we need you to work on. And, knowing Shooter, he'll want to work on his game. And if he can get that right or show the improvements that I guess he's been given some messages around what it's going to look like. If he can do that, then look, it's only going to be better for him moving forward. But yeah, he's proven it at an international level. So yeah, it's a tough one. Yeah,
and I think if we're honest, like Ross, you hit it on the head, there's actually no guarantee Will Jordan's going to be playing fullback. He may be picked in that outside backs, but I think, they have shown that they like Bowden there at 15. They've got Geordie, the ability to go there. Will has been great in that 14 jersey. And you'd have to think probably Leicester's got the inside running for the 11 at the moment.
Or they don't pick Leicester at all and they go with Will Jordan and Mark Talia. and go, okay, we don't need a power winger. We've got two outstanding wingers who really cannot be denied based on, form this year and what we've seen from them in international rugby altogether. Maybe they don't need it. My first thought was, maybe, just maybe, they haven't decided between Caleb Clark and Lester Whanganuku. And they've needed to select them both in order to see them both.
If you want the power winger, you need two, because if one goes down, World Cup time, it's not as easy to replace them. It is niggly. I think you do have to, if that's your game, you can't miss that. I'm not saying Mark can't play that. Mark can play the power winger where you can just throw everyone off and sidestep a million times and come out the other side somehow. But his injury won't be helping that either. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? So him being a niggle, there's going to be opportunity for guys like Leicester, I think, who warrants it, man. Mark's had an amazing year on the right wing. Will Jordan's earned the right to be there just on prior. But, man, Leicester has been something special. Yeah. Even defensively, got that turnover the other night. I don't know, the whole Crusaders team were men possessed, but he was certainly trying to make a statement.
He loves a turnover, Bryn. He celebrated that turnover like he just got a hat trick.
His turnover game, to be able to get the ball defensively, I think is a real big attribute that he has, especially on the outside of the edges. And I think going into the World Cup or even to the Rugby Championship, wingers that are able to get steals and be on another loose ball is really important. But, the attacking side of the game, geez, he's busy. He is just absolutely has such a good work rate, and his intensity that he does when he does a pick and go jip. You must love seeing that as a form of forward, him going through the middle and being able to help the big boys out as well.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that was one of the Blues' biggest struggle. They've averaged 61% gain line possession all year, and they got 44. That defence, especially in that first 40, was just ridiculous. Not ridiculous, it was as you'd expect in a semi-final, but it was just gave them no option. The Blues probably got a bit of they overkicked last time they were down there. Maybe they didn't want to kick too much, but then 63% of their rucks were in between the 22 and 50. Whereas if you look at the Crusaders, 45% of their rucks were in their 22. So they had the ability to either put it on the boot and or get in there through guys like Leicester in that power game. So it just didn't allow the Blues to, I suppose, get into a position to get over that try. And because that defence just kept coming in between the 22 and 50, it sort of wore them down.
One of the things Ian Foster talked about was how there were certain players who played themselves out of the All Blacks on the weekend. And you can't help but wonder whether Hoskins Sotutu and Akira Ioane were two of those guys.
Hoskins obviously missing out on the All Blacks 15 as well. And look, it's actually no crack at anyone that made the All Blacks 15, but that is quite a drop to be in the All Blacks and then fall right out of favour. And if you actually, we waxed lyrical, including Mr. Crusader Man, about how he had put on a bit of size, and he was being real dominant. And I went through his stats and compared them to sort of the other eights, and he leads it, including only one that Artie beats him in his tackle percentage and that turnover. So he's sort of 20 or 30 metres more post-contact metres, 20 or 30 metres more metres when he's in the carry. Similar sort of number of carries in the game, but he must have maybe run out of steam, because his form is great. And as I said, those stats are only half of the story, and that's why I think the last 2 weeks, the quarterfinal and the semi have played a big part in the selections around this. And they know they're going to need bodies that are fresh to win collisions up front. We know that's what Jace Ryan likes, and he's got certain players he knows what he can get out of, and he's gone for that.
So if stats are half the story, Bryn, what's the rest of the story on Hoskins Sotutu not making the squad, do you think?
There's been some guys that have been playing some fantastic footy in this position. You've got to think about Jacobson. You obviously love him, Ross, but his form that he's had, and I guess what he does, along with Finau, I think as well, when they go into their breakdowns, they do not miss when they go into those breakdowns. And so they've got a pretty clear message, I think, around the selection of that loose forward trio, and knowing what, I guess, you think of the South Africans and I guess in the Rugby World Cup stage, what we're going to need in that area. And I think, those two players, especially when it comes to the breakdown work, they're pretty pretty clinical, and they're very good around winning collisions. So whether they thought that Hoss wasn't able to do that, I'm not too sure. But those two players, alongside with having their own attacking ability and defensive work, but when it comes to the breakdown, those two boys, along with Kane, you look at Artie, Papali'i, Frizzell, he can do that as well. You're starting to look at a real mix of that loose forward trio around what it's going to look like at the Rugby World Cup, I think, when it comes to the collision areas and what we're going to need from our loose forwards.
And I think the stats back that up because Samipeni Finau leads the post-contact meters on average and then just behind him by 0.2 is Luke Jacobson. So the big tackles, and we spoke about Luke Jacobson, man, he's got those sharp shoulders back that originally got him selected, and I just think Samipeni Finau was just too good to ignore. Not only was he good in the tight, but man, when he holds his width and he seems really disciplined to play his role in their attack structure, especially phase play, and he made some great inroads down the right flanks a number of times this season. So both boys are tackling at 91%. They are worthy of being selected.
Bryn, I'm really keen for your take on the halfbacks. Brad Weber, I thought many would have thought that he was almost a shoo-in for one of the three spots. He's not there.
Based on performances, Cam Roygaard deserves to be there. And I guess the one bad thing about Brad being in that environment and Cam not being in there, you need to get Cam in there to see if he can play, especially at the Rugby Championship. And then can they take him to the World Cup? But they also know that Brad Weber, if they need him, he'll be ready to go for that World Cup selection. So it's all not gone for Brad. I think, Cam Roygaard, they're going to get him in there, give him an opportunity, and he deserves his performance with the Hurricanes. He played very, very well, and based on his game, he deserves to be there. But I think for Brad, like he's shown a lot in his career, the resilience that he's shown, he hasn't been selected for squads, but then he finds his way through injury or a lack of form from certain players. He's back in that environment. So, New Zealand Rugby are very lucky in that sense. I think Fozzie knows that, knowing what they can get with Brad, giving Cam an opportunity. If it doesn't work out, you can always go back to the tried and true with Brad when it comes to World Cup time, especially when it comes to experience. But not surprised with Cam's performances, and I think Finlay Christie has probably been the best player in that Blues side for the year, and is coming back next year as well. He's signed with New Zealand Rugby, and I'm not too sure if that goes into the thinking with Brad Weber leaving next year. But I just think with Cam's performances, and I think knowing what Brad can do, he's still in their back pocket for Fozzie if things do go a little bit south in their halfback department.
Yeah, and I think you've got to look at history and the way this coaching group selected the nines, and you'd have to think they always like that bigger nine, that different nine as their third halfback, so that they have that variation in their game and the ability to change in test matches. So, you were thinking they would head in that direction, but I think one thing that sealed it was Roygaard's performance against the Brumbies in Canberra. He was huge. He was a big part of sort of keeping them in that game and giving them a chance. And his form prior to that was key. But I think that game, I know I keep labouring the point, but I think these finals, and the All Black selectors had said, we want to know who's going to front up at the business end, because that's there's a level of intensity above that they're going into, and we need to know that you can cope with that sort of pressure.
I am interested in the Brad Weber scenario, based on what you're saying, Bryn, about, they already know him. And I've heard something similar that is part of their thinking. As a player, how do you take that? To be told, let's say you're told, we want to see this other bloke in the environment, we know what you can do, go over and play footy over there. You want to be an All Black. You want that jersey, you want that squad, and you certainly don't want to give that other bloke a chance. So it must be hard to hear a piece of news like that.
Yes, Ross. I can imagine it is tough, but there's nothing you can do about it. It's all you can do, really. And I guess, again, this is why I have such respect for Brad, because the amount of resilience that he's had to show in his career around having those tough phone calls and then being able to, I'm going to take this disappointment and I'm only going to control what I can control. And that's been able to play for the All Black 15, or he's played for Waikato, or he's played for the Hawke's Bay. He's just gone back and done what he's needed to do and controlling what he can control. So, yeah, look, I think, based on his resume and how he's played, it's always tough to have that conversation. But, like I said, when it comes to Brad Weber, do not sleep on him, because he'll go back to wherever he plays, All Black 15, Bunnings UPC, and he'll play some good footy. He'll be one of the best players on the field, and it comes back to his character. And again, if things don't go well, like I said before, the coaching staff are real lucky in that sense, that they'll know Brad will perform well at wherever he does play. And then if there's an injury or they're not liking how some guys are going, they'll give him another opportunity. But to answer your question, Ross, it's tough.
I'm also interested in the etiquette and around it. One of the things Ian Foster said, which was a real eye-opener on the breakdown last night, was, look, I've sent some messages and some texts to players, and some of them haven't replied, which is disappointing. What is the etiquette there? I would have thought the last thing you want to do is not reply to the All Blacks coach, even if you've missed out, because you're almost saying, well, I don't want back in.
Yeah, I mean, everyone takes it differently. I think it would be, talking to Bryn and I think we'd reply pretty quickly, but just everyone in this day and age does take that sort of information differently, and you've actually got to let them process, and sometimes actually, stepping away and not reacting and having that knee-jerk reaction and potentially saying something that you will regret is a safer one. But, on the other end, in terms of etiquette, maybe acknowledging you've received the text and coming back to it later. But it is hard, like having been dropped and, the emotions do run high. There's a lot of frustration. There's a lot of time and effort that, I suppose they've put in and focused to try and make that team, and it wasn't to be. And for some players, not even for the All Blacks 15. So I don't think you can put a generic rule on it. Obviously, there is a standard expectation from people. But it's a tough day. Yeah. It's a pretty tough day.
Yeah. Maybe you take 24 hours, but you wouldn't want
They normally told me to stop texting them.
Yeah, I bet.
They said, mate, can you bin it? You're gone.
Yeah.
Just leave it. No chance.
I want to know more.
Yeah.
I want to know more. What
do you think of the 6 minute when I did this? No, mate, you're gone. Average.
Yeah. It's hard, but it is. I don't know if it's a sign of immaturity or what it is, but geez, if that's the place you want to be, surely you go about it in a way that makes you more likely to be there next time.
I think the hard thing is you can't generalise. Like, it's pretty hard to put that out there, and it could be one person, two people. Yeah. There's a lot of people that comment impacts because everyone's thinking, who is it now? Do you know what I mean? So, take it with a grain of salt, I would say. He's obviously not happy that he didn't get responses, but you don't know who, how many, what it is. So it's a little bit unfair to, sort of have a crack at these players when it may not be, individuals that had missed the cut altogether. It could have been guys that have just missed out into the All Blacks 15.
Well, we love the honesty, Bryn, in the media, but sometimes you do wonder about the level of honesty that's required in those situations, Oh,
no, it is. I agree. I think all the points that you touched on is probably good. I think it's an emotional game, man. It just shows that, guys care about the All Black jersey.
Let's talk about Tamaiti Williams. You must know him relatively well. He turned up as, like a schoolboy number 8 in Christchurch, 140, 150 kilos of ginormous man. Yeah. He now can play both sides of the scrum. He's an All Black. What have you seen from him in your time with him that makes you think this guy is totally up to this level?
Oh, just time, I think, and I guess understanding his body. I think when he first came into the group, he was a big boy. Probably had a little bit of puppy, had a bit of puppy fat on him, and again, and credit to that, to their physio stuff. I know, Tux Neil, and I guess John down there have been really good around, I guess, getting him into a position where he needs to be able to perform at Super Rugby level. When you look at the consistency that he's had this year of game time, has had a lot more game time. He's come off the bench probably the last 2 years previously, and one of his big work-ons was being able to stay in game and, I guess, have second touch and working off the ball. I think there were times in games when he'd carry the ball, and then I guess he'd go missing a little bit and not doing the little things that you need to do at Super Rugby level and at international level. And he's continued to get better in that, because I think the one thing that he does have, he has an outstanding skill set. When it comes to his ball in hand, being able to have late footwork, very similar to Charlie Faumuina, and with the kind of footwork late at the line and offloads and his ability to be able to stay square and get the ball out the back to Richie, it's really good in his game. You talk around the scrummaging, he's obviously going to continue to keep getting better in that at such a young age. But I think the reason why he's in that squad as well is he's got a lot more fitter. He's been able to play longer minutes, play for longer moments, and been able to influence games for long periods of time. And so I think it's been a massive growth with him. Again, it comes back to him, I think, himself as well, knowing that there were some areas that he needed to work on. And he's probably had some really good chats with Jace Ryan and knowing what he needs to get to the international level, because his potential, I think, with what props are going to look like in the future, big times, I think is the blueprint of what it's going to look like for the props moving forward in the next 5 to 10 years.
Again, they've been strong at Maul time. And it's the big fellas up front that on attack that provide the seams for the hookers to score at the back and the locks to, you know, make sure that they're supported when they come down. You know, he's a big part of that. Defensively, he's a big part of that maul area. We know Jace Ryan loves that. Scrum time, I think he'd know that he'll have a bit to work on, especially, you know, at tight head. He probably had a tough night at the office a few weeks back against Offa. But other than that, he's been pretty strong both sides of the scrum for the most part. And then, you know, Bryn mentioned it, but he's sort of averaging 7 carries, 7 tackles. And the most important part about that is 50% of his carry meters, or over 50% of his carry meters, are post-contact meters. So he's winning collisions, he's coming out. Even if it's 2 or 3 meters a carry that he gets out the other side, that's 2 or 3 meters, you know, the defence has to get back, and all guys have to fold around a deeper ruck, which slows them down, which allows you to manipulate the defence and play on top of sides. It's little efforts like that, and you know, we mentioned Sammy Penifino and Luke Jacobson. Those are the guys that probably create the space for the wingers to look so flash.
You must have played with a few props that can play both sides. How rare is that ability?
Not really. Like, it is really hard. Like, I'd never played prop myself, but yeah, I think a lot of loose heads, you know, aren't always going to be as great as tight heads, and tight heads that, you know, it's taken, you know, off for a good few years. Like, I think he's been probably his best year at loose head this season for the Blues, but he's predominantly a tight head. So I haven't, you know, I suppose Franks was the best form of it, Ben Franks, that is. But I suppose the way Chrono puts it, and I'm going to steal it, and may need to edit this out if it's not appropriate, but he said it's like trying to wipe your backside with the opposite hand. And it's not that easy to just do. And you need to put a bit of, you know, practice and thought into it, I'd suggest.
When he said that to you, did you go and try it that night?
No. He said it every 2 seconds. But you got to remember, I'm not a prop. Like, I'm just thinking about my role as a hooker.
Well, it's all about increasing your skill set.
Yeah, well,
you know,
hookers play a role everywhere, so you know, they're already ambidextrous.
That's right. The other thing, I think I've told this story on the podcast before, talked about Ben Franks, and I remember interviewing him and asking him, and he said it was like, imagine throwing a tennis ball with your left hand and catching it. You know, it's that hard to get done.
Yeah, but if you put the work in, it's doable. You know, it's just repetitions. What do they say? Like, you know, I suppose the more you repeat it, you know, under pressure, the most rehearsed action will come to the fore. Do you know what I mean? So if you rehearse it enough times, under pressure you'll be able to deliver. And I think that's what we've seen in Tamaiti Williams in his whole game. He has just put a lot of work and a lot of repetitions into his year.
Just to carry on down this avenue, as a hooker, what do you expect differently from the person on each side of you? You know, what kind of skill set is different when you get into that scrum?
Oh, you know, your loose head, I suppose, as a hooker is helping you protect yourself, because a lot of the time tight heads will want to come in and pop you, so it makes it hard for you to hook. And your tight head's your big weapon. You can sort of trust him to do his own role. You know, it's normally a big workhorse. And I noticed that there was a viewer question around, is there really that much difference between 4 and 5 in terms of that locking? And there is, because a lot of the time the loose head and the hooker will work together predominantly, and then, you know, and depending on your scrum plan, you will come with your tight head, but you know, it's just not the same, and that's because, you know, you can rely on a big tight head lock. Like, there is, not that the loose head lock isn't pushing, but the tight head lock needs to be your best scrummaging lock, because they can anchor a lot of weights, and you almost always want to try and, you know, get your weight through your tight head, because the old adage is it's most of the time it's right shoulder, which normally is going towards that tight head. So there is, you know, an element of wanting your biggest and strongest in those positions. So to do both, you have to be a pretty formidable athlete.
Who was the best lock that you had in that scenario?
Ali Williams is the best I had. Like, he literally left bruises on my backside and the prop's backside. Like, his shoulder was just, I've never seen someone get so fired up for every scrum, and I mean every training scrum, every scrum in the game. It was like his thing, and man, he pushed. He gave it death.
His sore backside, you might have had to use the other hand then.
I might have. But yeah, he's Jacob Pearce is really good, actually. He was another one. big body. He could rip into it.
That was a good question from Aaron Dolan on YouTube. If you want to ask us any questions, go into the YouTube comments section or go to Aotearoa Rugby Pod at sky.co.nz. Send us a question. We'll do our best to answer it for you, let you in on that. Now, before we move on, is there anything else about this All Blacks team that you want to talk about?
I think just one point there, Peter Gus. It's great to see him in that All Blacks 15. You know, like he sort of got selected, fell out, and you know he spoke about in his Taranaki season he just was a little bit lost. But he's been playing some of his best footy as well for the Chiefs. So him getting rewarded, and even though he may be going overseas, I think he could still, you know, we're speaking about injuries and balance the squad. He can still play a big role in 2023.
For you, Bryn?
I'm just going to put it to you guys through with the number 10s, because based on Damien McKenzie's form, I think he warrants an opportunity to be able to play, because I think the biggest thing that I was impressed around his performance against the Chiefs, we probably haven't touched on it a lot actually, the Chiefs game against the Brumbies, but his game management, and I think his goal kicking as well in big moments, not just on the weekend, his 50-metre penalty goal that he got, but he's done that a lot this season when it's come to big kicks for him to be able to turn up and get that over the line. And I think his game management on the weekend, his kicking game, understanding and getting better in that space, especially in the wet. You know, when I was watching that game, I was thinking, this is going to be a really good test for Damon, his game management, because he's got a lot better throughout the year. But big finals footy, wet footy, and I think he's got a lot better in that space. So you're looking at the 3 10s. I know we've touched on Richie and Bodie, who you start, but man, you can't not miss Damien McKenzie with his performances this year, especially in big games on the weekend as well.
I think, especially early in the season when everyone's talking about him, his game management was on fire, and we had Brad Weber come on and sung his praises. I think the key will be is those little kicks, because I sort of said the Blues were at 63% in between the 22 and 50 for the Iraqs. Well, the Chiefs were at 61%, and I do think they potentially could have kicked a little bit more at times into that backfield and put the pressure back on the Brumbies, which potentially would lead to a line out for them or a line out for the Brumbies, then they can get up and just getting that balance of attack right so that they've got that punch that we've seen all year, so they can get I suppose, across in sevens. We're so used to seeing them get across in sevens, and they tackled at 95%, and that was the big reason they won that game. Like the Brumbies going to the corner, their defence stood up when it mattered, but I do think, to break down this Crusaders defence off the back of the way they performed, those kicks will be important. That he did extremely well earlier in the season, still did them well on the weekend. I agree with Bryn, or it might be a Shaun Stevenson. He has, when he switches back on that side, people are going to be used to him running, so a little stab through from him as well, just so that I suppose you can rest those big boys for when you get into the 22 and you can get across the line like Brodie did late in the game.
He did rely a little bit on Rona and Poihipi through the season, didn't he, for those kind of kicks, Bryn? We maybe haven't seen as much kicking from maybe Nankivell and ALB since they've been back.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think that's, if you're looking at the times that they've played the Crusaders, that having that kicking element is going to be really important. I think when you've got a really good defence, it's really hard to be able to penetrate them. Having attacking kicks when it comes from your 10, 12, 15, 13, whoever it may be, coming all from different angles, and you're looking at, I think you're going to get a great insight, I think, on the weekend with the Crusaders and the Chiefs, both teams. When it comes to finals footy, defensively, they're very, very good. 95% you're talking around for the Chiefs, and the Crusaders operated at 90% on the weekend. So you've got to be able to find ways to break down the walls from both sides. And I think, you look at the Chiefs and especially this year with their attacking plans. And when they've played the Crusaders, you've got to be on the whole time. I look at the way the Chiefs attack. On the weekend, they play, especially early on in the wet, they played a lot off 10. So you've got the ability to be able to play off Damo. They play off 9. They've got switch options, which you saw with Damien McKenzie and Shooter Stevenson, with Brad Weber coming out and doing a late cut to then go back down the short side. And then you've also got, if you've got weak defenders in and around that hard defense with your big props, you've got the ability of getting a flat ball from Weber, from McKenzie or Shooter, coming back on a step back and then being able to get it to the inside and go around those big boys. So for the Crusaders, they're going to have to be on the job. And I think it comes back, Jipper loves talking about this, but the collision area and whoever's going to win that, you're going to see some massive collisions when it comes to those two teams on the weekend, because, man, the Chiefs love getting their body height low and cleaning men, taking them to the ground, and the Crusaders love doing that as well. So I know, Jipper, you'll probably be frothing at the mouth to be able to see the amount of contact and collision that you're going to see on the weekend, because you've got the best defensive side, especially when it comes to finals footy, playing on the weekend and being able to get. It's going to be, I reckon, it's going to come down to one or two moments, like it has the last couple of times that these two teams have played against each other.
Yeah, and I think you're probably going to see parity, and this is where, to give yourself an opportunity, it's up front rugby, as we know. But I think we will see a game that it's probably going to be 50-50 and you're going to win some, you're going to lose some, but I think it'll end up evenly. So I think your point around the 10s, that 9-10 combo and how this game is managed, how you save fuel in the tank, how you play on top of them, when you do that, when you don't, will be the deciding factor. So those 2 10s, it may be, answering Bryn's question is, who comes out on top, gets that 10 jersey in RG.
That came around in a very circular way. Well done.
It did.
Speaking of which, obviously Drummond and Mo'unga, we've seen more of them. We've seen more good quality play out of them over the last few weeks. What are they bringing that's really going to challenge the Chiefs?
Well, Drummond's just so consistent. He just is all about the team. He's terms of his communication to his pack in front of them, pumping them up when they need to, not doing it, and then just getting that ball in Richie's hands as soon as possible, as quick as possible. Where he may have an opportunity is they're so used to seeing him pass. There may be opportunities that if this game is played at speed to pick on some guys late in the piece and around that breakdown. And then, Richie's just, I don't know, the big game, the man just steps up. If you focus too much on him, he will put others away. And that's what I was meaning before about Dallas McLeod, is the Crusaders, if they know what line they have to run or what shape they're running, they will just commit to it 100% and give Richie every opportunity to pick the right person. And then if you're more focused on how many variables are coming at you defensively, someone like Richie has enough pace to go straight through the gap, which we probably haven't seen as much of out the back of the forward pod, Bryn, this season. He was really good at splitting that sort of last forward defender, first back defender, and going through that gap. So, and that was probably emphasised when Dalton flew out of the line and got that red card. That's because he's such a threat in and around that sort of that split. So I think you're going to see what we always see. He'll take control and he'll put it on his own shoulders to bring this game home.
Bryn, when you look at the 29-10 result at the start of the season, 34-24 midway through the season, what were the elements of those games that got the Chiefs up over the Crusaders, and what areas do the Crusaders need to improve from those games in order to get up this weekend in Hamilton?
Yeah, it was a while ago, but I think I remember the one they played in Hamilton. For long periods of that game, they dominated it. They just weren't able to get over the line and be able to score points. And so I remember talking to those boys. I think they played, and I probably don't actually want to give the Chiefs any ammo here, but I think they did talk around. They felt comfortable. They felt comfortable in that game. They just weren't able to get over the points. The things that they were doing, they were being able to really stress the Chiefs, and they weren't able to get over the line, obviously, and get the result. But they took a lot of confidence in knowing that, if they do get their things right on a different day, they score 2 or 3 tries that were held up or weren't given. It could have been a different result. But I think also as well for the Chiefs, you look at the Chiefs, if you give them a moment, they can score a try out of nothing. And like I said, especially in these games, it might come down to 1 or 2 opportunities where a shooter out of the line or a misread. I think last time they played in Hamilton, Shaun Stevenson was able to get through David Havili and a misread around going through the gap, drawing past to Shaun Stevenson, and then they score. So the ability that I think when it comes to defense, and I know in finals time that Crusaders group, no different from the Chiefs, they were talking around defense wins championships. And so the amount of communication and microcoms that you're going to have between each other, I think for the Crusaders is going to be really important, because you might defend very, very well for 60, 65 minutes. You might get everything right, but then bang, there's one misread, there's one miscommunication. You come out of the line and Damien and Shooter and all those players, they've got the opportunity to be able to break in a game. So, and then it goes on the other side as well. I think more importantly for the Chiefs, I think it's going to come down to set piece.
I think the Crusaders' biggest weapon, and it's been happening probably for the last month or so, is they've broken team spirits before halftime. Like, they have been so ruthless in that first 40, first 20. And a big part of it's that driving more. Cody Taylor we've seen score a lot of tries the last few weeks, and it just, that gap for the Blues, meant they had to chance their arm, and it caused issues in the second half. It was the same for the Ndrua. So I think stopping that hot start will be key for the Chiefs. And what the Chiefs have done well is their defence has held on. They probably haven't been playing their best rugby of the season, but then when they've got their opportunity, they've taken it. And they're doing it through threes. Like, they're not trying to be a team that beats anyone by 50. They're in finals mentality, and they've just been chipping away at those threes. And 2 weeks in a row, that's been the difference.
I was surprised actually by the Brumbies' lack of taking threes in a close game.
I think they just had so much belief in that driving maul of theirs. They were going to win the game, and you got to give credit to the Chiefs. Like, when the Brumbies went to the corner, I was like, man, this is the game here. If the Brumbies go over here, you'd think they'll go on with it, but the defence stood up, and the numbers on feet, but then the decisions around that breakdown, when to attack it, when to slow it, was just on point. And that's why they're in the final. That's why they're first, and they get the home final.
And it's a really good practice session to take on the Crusaders. You couldn't ask for a better one.
No, you couldn't. And the Brumbies threw everything at them. So the Chiefs do also need to remember. Sometimes you get in these things and you're looking at the opposition. Man, they're really good. And if they just focus on themselves, I do think a lot of it will take care of it themselves, in terms of just backing themselves and backing what they're really good at. And they've got some pretty impressive forwards. We've spoken about contact meters. They've all been Chiefs players. You've got Brodie Retallick, who's playing the house down. So that's why I'm saying, I do think it is going to be the first receivers this week that will be key. I do think this will be a 50-50 split up front.
I remember that we played the final. I think we played the Super Rugby Aotearoa finals in the rain. I think we had 2 red cards and things weren't going our way. And you just know that when you're playing them, they just don't give up. They've got that die-hard mentality. They've got a very similar mindset, I think, to the Crusaders when it comes to finals footy. And it's a challenge, and you just love playing teams like that. And I know that group, man, they'll be that excited, seeing it as I can imagine in the media, they'll be saying it's a great opportunity. We're looking forward to the challenge. Very similar to the Blues last year, going up to Eden Park and getting the job done there. They'll be frothing at the bit, as well as the Chiefs. They'll be telling them themselves 3-0, getting 3 wins throughout the year. Really does show that there could be a turn in New Zealand rugby if that does happen.
I think that's one of the cool things about the Crusaders' legacy. They won their first 3 titles away from home. They've won more titles since then away from home. The dominance that is the story hasn't always necessarily been there, in that they haven't had an easy run through finals. They've had to earn their titles away from home. And if there was a team that you would not count out this weekend because of that, it's the Crusaders. Oh,
massively. And look, a lot of the attention's on the Chiefs, and you use loose forwards as an example. That's going to be 3 All Black loose forwards versus guys that, either in the 15 or have just missed out. So I think that chip on the shoulder, it's certainly, I think it was a big reason, and, Bryn was obviously there, but last season that was quite the performance, and the fact that they maybe didn't feel like they were getting the respect publicly. They wanted to make that statement, and they certainly did that. And I think it's not as prevalent because of how clinical they were in that semi. If anything, they may be starting to be talked about as the favourite, and the Chiefs maybe not playing at that game. So it is different in a sense, but like all good sports people, you'll find a reason to have that chip on your shoulder so that you do turn up on the night to perform.
Who wins?
I think the Chiefs. Yeah, it would be. I just think it'll be a big ask, and these All Black boys with World Cup, they do need a front in this game. I can't emphasise enough how I think the last 2 weeks and this final will be in the selector's mind leading to these big tests.
Bryn?
I'll go for the Crusaders. I think if they can get Sam Whitelock back, I'm not too sure what his selection is going to be. I think he's going to be a massive cog in that wheel if they can get him back. But at the same time, if they don't, Quinton Strain's been doing unbelievable work and has obviously been in the All Black 15 and been able to great to see him not getting injured. But I just can't imagine. I can't imagine them losing. I think with Razor going.
Where is it going to be won? What's telling you that confidently? That because you seem pretty adamant that that's going to happen, or is it just you're just being as bad as I am when the Blues are playing someone?
I think you're trying. I could be on the Chiefs board here, but
Mate, you're not playing for them. The Chiefs aren't listening to you.
I think it's very similar to last year. I look at the Blues last year, right? So they were the form team going into last year. I think that their way that they played in the quarterfinals and the semifinals football was a little bit similar to the Chiefs. I think the Chiefs have won. They've got the job done, which is great. But you look at the way that the Crusaders have built. Obviously, they played very well against the draw. But then the consistency that they played against the Blues, they are peaking at a final, coming to a final. Whereas I don't think the Chiefs are peaking. They haven't peaked to where I think where the Crusaders are. So with that and being a part of that group, I think I can say that I think the Crusaders will win. But
Fantastic answer, Bryn. Fantastic. You sold me. You actually sold me. I thought you were just talking rubbish, but no, you've got a lot of relevant points there.
It's a very, very fair argument, and we'll look forward to this weekend to see whether or not that one comes
It's just good to see him under pressure once, because every time it's like Blues Chiefs or Blues Crusaders, I'm like, yeah, I think the Blues are going to win, and you guys come at me hot. It's just good to see you in the hot seat.
Yeah, it's good.
Mate, it was like he was clearing you out at the ruck, mate. You had the ball on the side. There's an untouchable halfback with his hands on the ball, and
mate, it was just
coming
because
through.
He'd spoken all show about how good the Chiefs were, and then he was just like, "Oh yeah, there's no doubt the Crusaders are going to win." I'm like, "What? Hold on a minute. That's not what I've heard for the last 50 minutes." Peaking at the right time sold me. They are. Yep. I can't argue with that, man. The last 2 weeks have just been ridiculously clinical.
Yeah. They built nicely, especially when you consider the fact that the Blues, they'd only lost one game in 9 weeks or something.
They were the best team in the second half. They'd only averaged 7 points in the second half the whole season.
Yeah.
The Blues, defensively.
Yeah.
Their biggest, we said it last week, the Blues needed to stop the Crusaders' hot start, otherwise it was going to be tough. They didn't do that. But the way the Crusaders continued on in the second 40 was really impressive.
Yeah, all of the teams that were in the finals, showed pretty elite defence at some point during the competition. Maybe the Brumbies didn't until that semi-final, and then they were good on defence. But the Blues, breaking down that Blues defence was their
superpower.
Yeah.
But it just went, yeah. But I do think it was off the back of the Crusaders' defence, if you know what I mean. But I've said all that after the last 50, so I don't need to hear that again.
Okay. Chiefs, Crusaders. Let's see what happens on Saturday. It is going to be an absolute rip snorter. We will see you again next week. James Parsons, thank you very much. Bryn Hall, great to see you again. Love the analysis. We'll see what happens.
Be back, boys. Good to see you. Looking forward to it.
Absolutely, and thank you very much for joining us. We'll see you again next week on the Aotearoa Rugby Pod. If you want to get in contact, leave a comment on YouTube or send us an email, Aotearoa rugbypod@sky.co.nz. We'll see you next week. Next week's show will also include a bloke called Liam Ireland, who was the winner of our tipping comp. 23-year-old master's student, studies frogs. Interesting bloke.
And rugby.
Very good at tipping and rugby. He's very good on rugby. So we'll include him next week as well. Get the oil on how these things. Well, we should have asked him for his tip for this week, actually, to be fair.
Probably. I think he went with the Chiefs.
He would have got it right. Yeah. So thank you very much. We'll see you again next week. Mā te wā.